The views and opinions expressed by hosts and guests on Patriots with Grit do not necessarily reflect those of Patriots with Grit LLC, its founders, and owners.
Get ready for truth bombs and guidance from conservative leaders and entrepreneurs from God-fearing, freedom-loving, truth-telling, patriotic Americans. Welcome to Patriots with Grit. Now let's jump into today's episode with your host, Darren Ross.
Well, hey there, and welcome back to another great episode here at Patriots with Grit. Today, Randy, we're going to talk about a topic that you and I did not even really know existed a couple of years ago, and I would venture to guess that most of our viewers didn't know or currently don't know either.
Well, the problem is we have talked in the past about what is brain death, but the disturbing part is I bet you didn't know that they created the definition of brain death simply to kickstart their organ peddling money train.
I tell you what, our guest today is a 50-year retired pediatrician and neonatologist, Dr. Paul Byrne. Let's get him in here right now.
I couldn't give anything a higher endorsement.
I would be remiss had I not include Cardio Miracle on my very short list of secrets.
It's the real deal. It's a real product. It's not another supplement.
I'm operating about 6 to 8 hours, and I've noticed that being on this Cardio Miracle has made a huge difference.
Since I started taking Cardio Miracle, about 8 months into it, the benefits have been fantastic.
You know, if I get hungry, then I just have a Cardio Miracle.
I encourage you to take this seriously because it's not only about your athletic performance, it's about the general health long term.
Not only is it safe, but it's necessary to take Cardio Miracle to stay well.
This let me sleep. It's filling up more energy, more get up and go. And it's all because of what this company does.
For me as a doctor, Cardio Miracle is a staple.
Cardio Miracle to me is hope in a glass.
Well, Dr. Paul Byrne, it's an honor to have you on our show here today at Patriots with Grit. You're a retired physician. I think you were a pediatrician and a neonatologist for over 50 years. What a testament, Randy, for the medical profession.
That's incredible. You've seen a lot over the years, haven't you?
We need good doctors like Dr. Byrne in there today, I think, in my opinion.
Yep.
So, Dr. Byrne, welcome to Patriots with Grit, my friend.
Yes, I'm happy to be here with you. So far as the changes in medicine are concerned, it's probably difficult for people to realize that when I first started in medicine, the IV tubing was red rubber. And
really?
We had to wash it out and sterilize it and reuse it. The needles were steel, and the barrel of the syringes had numbers and marks on them they had to match. And so we've come so far in my lifetime. So far as I'm a pediatrician, and when I first started to practice, when a baby was born prematurely and had trouble with breathing, we would go see the baby, only to come back in the next day or so and pronounce the baby dead. There were no treatments for sick babies. In fact, insurance companies did not pay for sick babies. The way that healthcare was paid for the baby was it was attached to the mother's bill for that newborn baby, and so when we began, because it'd be less than 3 pounds and 4 ounces. Trouble with breathing, it was 100% mortality. That's why I started. And larger than that, if they had trouble breathing, they died. We had no treatment.
Right.
And so I went to the administrator of the hospital at Cardinal Glennon Children's Hospital and said, "Sister, these babies die and we aren't doing anything. I would like to start a nursery, especially for sick babies." And she asked the question like you would expect, well, who's going to pay? And then I had to look into it as to who was going to pay. And I tried to get help from the federal government, and they wouldn't pay, not from the state government, not from the city government. So I went back to Sister and I said, "Sister, we have a children's hospital. We do things for all other ages of children, and we're not doing anything for newborns." So she said, all right. So the first year I got 30 babies referred to me. by the time I left there, about 20 years later, I was getting more than 600 babies from more than 50 hospitals. Cardinal Glennon Children's Hospital was really one of the first hospitals in the Midwest to have a special care nursery for babies. When we started, we had no way to breathe for a baby. If they had trouble with breathing, they died. And I think I started in 1963, and it was probably 1970 till we made some significant advance. And the significant advance had to do with one phase of the ventilator. It's commonly called a respirator, but it's really a ventilator. It just moves air. But to follow that through, the ventilator that was invented for that 2-pound baby had to be very precise and very sensitive. And once that ventilator was invented for the 2-pound baby, it's good for the 200-pound man. It's exactly the same. So I'm able to help people at all ages, at least with that phase of their life support, the ventilator, because I know it like I know the back of my hand. I was there with every step of it. And the other thing that I'll tell you about what occurred that affects all of us, and that is microtechnique. The premature baby has only a tiny bit of blood, and we were lucky to be able to do a blood count. And so microtechnique had to be invented for the baby, and it's what they use on everybody. But it comes right out of other doctors and myself saying, let's try. And we did put our heads together and tried. And the ventilator that was invented for the infant is used for everybody. The microtechnique that's developed because of the infant is used for everybody. When we go, they draw a tube of blood, but they use only a tiny bit, and the rest of it gets discarded. And so that's interesting. The thing that obviously I think you can tell that I was one of the leaders in the field of neonatology, certainly in the Midwest, but I would go to all the meetings, and one of the things that we did, and it made me think about it because I presented it at the Society for Pediatric Research, but we had no way to do blood pressure. And we were here in St. Louis where McDonnell Douglas was, and they were putting men into space. So I wrote a letter to Mr. McDonald, and I said, "Dear Mr. McDonald, you put men into space and follow their blood pressure. I'm here at Cardinal Glennon Hospital, and I don't have a way to take blood pressure on premature babies." So he sent me 2 electronic engineers, and with their oscilloscopes. In the old days, there were big boxes, oscilloscopes, and I had my stethoscope, and we went to work, and we invented a way to take blood pressure on premature babies. We used the blood pressure cuff that fit on the astronaut's finger and moved it up to the arm of the premature baby. It was the exact right size.
That would make sense.
That size continues to be useful in the taking of blood pressure in premature babies. And so in any event, we were leaders in the field. And then a patient by the name of Joseph was under my care. Joseph was born prematurely and was on a ventilator. And sometimes when I give a presentation, I would show a photograph of Joseph. He was very tiny, on a ventilator for quite some time, and he wouldn't move and he wouldn't breathe. And so we did a brainwave test, and his brainwave test was interpreted as consistent with cerebral death. So death was written on his chart, and I looked at Joseph, and Joseph wasn't dead. So I called the neurologist. I say, "What's this mean?" He said, "Oh, don't be too concerned about it. It affects older people more than infants. I said, well, what do I do? He said, well, get another test. So we did, and it was unchanged. So I called him back. I said, what do I do now? He said, well, some places they stopped treating the babies because of that. And you got to know that was early on in the game of organ transplants. But I said, well, I don't do that. I said, I treat babies. Some live, some die. And I continued to treat him. And as Joseph continued to live, and when he got to be about 6 months old, I called the same neurologist and I said, can you get some articles for me? And then I started to study the subject. And it took me, I think, at least a year to understood the language, because the language of brain death is they observe an absence of function of the brain. But an absence of function doesn't mean that the brain is destroyed, much less that it's dead. If you go the other way, though, when somebody is dead, their brain doesn't function, but neither does anything else. And it is because it is destroyed. So, and I would read some articles, and in one paragraph, they would have these three concepts: an absence of function, destruction of the brain, and death, used in the same paragraph and interchanged as if they were the same. So that's how I began. My first article about brain death was published in 1977 in a journal for doctors in Missouri called Missouri Medicine. The second article that I published was in 1979 in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And then we went on from there. We have an article in the Gonzaga Law Review that's 85 pages and has 244 footnotes. So we began to pursue the subject from the question of science, and of course, from the science, we have to put in the medical criteria for death, but it also gets involved with the law. And while to think about these things, we do have to think about the person alive, or the remains of a person after death. We have to think of the medical criteria that we use to determine that somebody has died. And we have to look at the law. And the law should be set up to protect the life of the person. So the law should be such that you shouldn't declare somebody dead while they're alive. And the law should be there for that. The law right now in this United States, and essentially all of the states, makes it so that if there is a cessation of brain function, of course they use more sophisticated words like irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, you can call that person dead, whatever all that is, and we'll get into that. But they make it equivalent, identical and equivalent to irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory circulation and respiration. These things are not identical. They're completely different. That they put them in the law as if they are identical. Both of them use an absence of function. Neither of them require destruction of the brain, much less destruction of the person.
So can I clarify something?
Sure.
So I look at it two different ways. You got brain and you've got the body function, the circulatory, respiratory. Which one is the most critical? I think you said if the body quits, then the brain will quit. Is that correct? Because once the circulation stops, the brain dies.
Well, let's put it this way. Let's think about systems. Let's try that. And there are 11 systems in the human body. The largest system is the skin. That's the largest system. It's, we use the term integumentary system, but then there are vital systems. The vital systems are the respiratory system, the circulatory system, and the brain. So in the declaration of death, the very minimum that we ought to have is we shouldn't declare somebody dead unless there is destruction of at least those three systems. That's the minimum. Now, at death, there can be lots of others, but so the law should be written that no one shall be declared dead unless there is destruction of the system. And destruction is a proper word to use, because when I look at you or you look at me, you can see that we are a living person, but we have structure, and that structure is there. When at the time of death, the structure falls apart. It falls apart, and we know that some organs are more sensitive than others. For instance, the heart, we know, is very sensitive, so that in about 5 or just a few more minutes than that, the heart is so damaged from a lack of oxygen that you can't transplant it. Some other organs, like a kidney, will take about 30 minutes. And if they cool the kidney, it can be about an hour. But there's a difference in time until there is destruction. And so the principle has to be there. The first is the principle of life. And we can see the life and its living substance. And the living substance of the human being is different from the substance of the dog or the substance of the cat. They have living substance too, but we have living substance. And the living substance is, we can see the physical, but there's something in there that's more than just the physical, and that's the spiritual. And we put the word on there, soul. If you have trouble with the word soul, at least say that there is life in the physical. And that life in the physical is there from the creation, and it's a continuum until the event of death. And then the life falls away. The life and the physical separates. The soul and the body separates. And when that life leaves, there is destruction. And the first destruction is called autolysis. Auto meaning self, lysis meaning destruction. Every living cell has components and makeup. That's the structure, and all of that is held together, and it does its thing because it has the life there. When the life leaves, the structure falls apart. And the first time that the first part of that, we call it autolysis. It isn't that something comes and enters to make it get destroyed. It gets destroyed because the life is gone, and then it falls apart. Obviously, when I tell you about autolysis, we're talking about things that are at the cellular level when we study them. When we go to pronounce somebody dead, we don't get at the cellular level, but no one should be declared dead unless there is destruction of the circulatory and respiratory and nervous systems, or at least the entire brain of that nervous system. And in brain death, what they do is they observe absence of some function of the brain, and they they declare them brain dead while the heart's beating and they have circulation, and they put out urine. And when they cut on them to take their organs, the heart rate goes up and the blood pressure goes up. All of that are signs of life. But what they do is say, oh, that doesn't count. The only thing that counts is if you are aware of yourself. Or one of the magic words that some groups are using is self-integration. You're alive when you show self-integration, but if you can't show that, you're dead. And it loses the basic things that we all know. We all know that each one of us is one person. We all know that. we all know that we have human substance. That human substance has parts that we take apart. We study it in the field of biology, but those are just not isolated parts. There is an interdependence of cells, tissues, and organs, and interdependence of cells, tissues, and organs that make up functions like respiratory function or circulatory function. And there are multiple systems, and there's an interdependence of systems that maintains the unity, the oneness of that life and the body, the unity of that soul in the body. And really, if the unity of the body is there, it's a unity of the body and soul. And when the life leaves, you have the dead remains, and now there's not unity of body and soul. In fact of the matter is, it's more proper to call it dead remains than it is dead body. We have a word for a dead body. It's a corpse.
Right.
Can you get any organs from a corpse? No. You have to be alive. And organ transplant is part of what we have to deal with. But what I've tried to do in this time is make it very clear that we know what life is, and that life, how we study it, can depend on where we go to school or what religion we belong to, or we don't study it at all. But whatever it is, we can know that each one of us is one. We can know that each one of us is human substance. We can know that each one of us is alive. We also know that our life on earth will end. And when the life ends, when the life separates from the body, when the soul separates from the body, you have dead remains, and it gets manifest as an alteration of structure. And yes, there is an absence of function, but the absence of function is because of the change in structure, the destruction that's there. So I tell you all of that. Organ transplant gets involved because that's why they invented brain death. When I learned to declare somebody dead, and I learned as a junior in medical school, and my responsibility was to declare a lady dead. It was in the middle of the night. The nurse called me, but we didn't declare somebody dead unless there was no response of any kind. There was no breathing of any kind. There was no heartbeat. There was no response. Obviously, no pulse, no blood pressure. And we learned and knew not to be in a big hurry. And so at that time, as a junior medical student, I asked the other doctors who were teaching me and that kind of thing, well, how long do you wait? They said, don't be in a hurry. So later, when I started to study this subject, I tried to find how long to wait. It's not written down. The Uniform Law Commission did extensive study not about 2 or so years ago. They couldn't find it either. It's not written down in any way. It was passed on from doctor to generation of doctor to the next generation. Just don't be in a hurry. Some of the very conservative people would say not that unless they're cold, you can say, well, maybe they're alive in some way. Once that structure falls apart, eventually things happen in the muscles so that they get stiff, and we call that rigor mortis.
Mm-hmm.
And the circulation can separate, and there's a different color in the dependent parts than the upper parts, and we call it livor mortis. So there is a way to be sure that somebody is dead, but we should not be declaring them dead when there's a beating heart and circulation, because that's false.
So let me ask you this. So if the heart stops, if a person can be revived, were they actually dead?
No. Revived means revived and resuscitated.
Mm-hmm.
If they were dead, it would be a resurrection.
That would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah, be a resurrection. Well, words get used loosely, but words do have meaning, and so if you're going to study the subject, like the subject of death, and I would readily admit that most people haven't spent as much time and intensity at studying it, trying to learn about it, but trying to stay away from it, that kind of thing. So and I can tell you that I did not set out my life to study this subject, but there are things about death that we can know. And one of the things that we know is that we can resuscitate somebody who has no evidence of life. Their heart's not beating, they're not breathing, there's no response, but yet we can resuscitate them. Why? Because the life never left. Once the life leaves, there is destruction, and like the heart has been studied, well, and they have a way of studying the heart. There's an instrument they use to follow when somebody has a heart transplant, and they go down and they get a little piece of the heart, and they can tell when that autolysis, that destruction, is just beginning, and they want to catch it before it gets too bad. So it can be known when that destruction occurs. How much destruction does there have to be? Not a very minimum are those three systems. Now, some people say, well, the circulatory system is more important than the respiratory system or the nervous system. I'm not sure. The circulatory system is certainly important to provide what's in the blood to the tissues, but it is the metabolism and the basic metabolism in the lungs is exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. It's the basic metabolism in the tissues, and that's what respiration is. Respiration isn't just moving on the chest. That's ventilation, but respiration is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, and that only happens in a living person. So an absence of circulation is not enough. It has to be more than that, and the law should be written. Right now, the law is written: an individual is dead, and then it's the Determination of Death Act, and it says either one or two. Come on.
Yeah.
A person is not dead by either one or two. A person is dead, and dead is the same for all of us. So why did they build that? Why did they make the law that way? They made the law that way so they could get organs.
Okay.
And then
go ahead.
Well, Dr. Byrne, it seems like... go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, it seems like we have a delay here. I apologize, but it seems like anymore the whole organ transplant, organ donation, organ transplant team, it seems like there's kind of a sense of urgency or to hasten this process to get organs. We've heard a lot about this over the last few years. I didn't know this world even existed, other than, it's your noble duty to be an organ donor, is what I was told. So tell us, when did this start? And then I want to get into the whole organ donation topic a little bit. Who do the organs actually belong to? What do people need to do if they want to or not want to be an organ donor? I want to kind of touch base and kind of educate our viewers and our listeners on that, because I think people are kind of in the middle, Randy. I know we were. Well, I didn't know which way to go on this. So talk to us a little bit about that, if you would.
Way back in 1963, the FDA banned a potential treatment for cancer. It was called Laetrile or B17. It was so popular that over 70,000 Americans went to Mexico, got treated, or smuggled it back into the United States. This was according to Newsweek. Laetrile has always been under attack by big pharma, big government, and big media. What's that sound like, Darren?
Well, Randy, I believe it sounds like ivermectin. You know, Laetrile is naturally found in somewhat like 1,200 foods, including apricot seeds. And it's one of those things that Big Pharma tries to hide for one reason and one reason only, because there's no money in it for them.
So then in the 70s, Sloan Kettering, which is an American cancer research institute, it found that Laetrile could be successful in preventing and stopping cancer growth.
Today, we're giving you the source of Laetrile, which comes in the form of capsules, powder, and seeds. On the website, you can go to rncstore.com/grit. That's rncstore/grit. Get all kinds of research there, plus take advantage of a nice discount. That's rncstore.com/grit.
Well, we'll try. First of all, where did it come from and when did it start? I think it had to do with doctors trying to do as good as they could do. And doctors knew when somebody died and it had to do with the heart and circulation, and that was important. Other things were important, but that was important. So what they did is they tried to get hearts from cadavers, transplant them, but it didn't work. So what happened then, Dr. Christian Bernard in South Africa did a heart transplant. And 3 days later, Dr. Kantrowitz in Brooklyn, New York, at Montefiore Hospital, did the second heart transplant. What he did is he cut the beating heart out of a 3-day-old baby who had a problem with the brain and transplanted it into an 18-day-old baby who had a problem with the heart. And by the time they got done with their operations, both babies were dead. It was immoral. It was illegal. So how did they solve this problem? They set up a committee at Harvard. Christian Bernard and Kantrowitz did their work in December of 1967. They set the committee up in February of 68 at Harvard, and in July of that year, they published their first article, and it was called, the title is A Definition of Irreversible Coma. Now, you can't be in coma unless you're alive, because if you're in coma, you have to be alive, but a definition of irreversible coma. And when they did that, they made it brain death, and they said they had to have, there were two reasons why you had to have it. Well, if you keep these people alive, the intensive care units will get crowded, so we have to have a way to move them along. Or the other thing is, if we do organ transplants from people whose brain doesn't function so well, there'll be controversy. So how do we solve this? We just invent brain death. And they did invent brain death, and it was called the Harvard criteria. And to put in perspective some of your questioning about this, the Harvard criteria required 24 hours of observation before you could declare them brain dead. It also called for not only was their unresponsivity, that means no response from the brain, but there was also unreceptivity, no reception in the brain. And this had to be there for 24 hours. Well, can't get many organs that way, so they started by reducing the time from 24 hours down to 12 hours, down to 6 hours, down to 3 hours. There's one article in the literature in Cleveland Clinic Quarterly, it was 1 hour that they could declare them. And you said they keep wanting to get organs sooner or something like that you ask about. But that's been going on from the beginning. The first set of criteria was the Harvard criteria. Between 1968 and 1978, there were 30 disparate sets of criteria, all of which became less strict than the previous ones. And it goes on all the way and continues to invent more sets of criteria so that you can get people even more alive so you can get organs for transplantation. And that's the driving force. You have to know that my approach to all of this was not to do anything about organ transplants. My approach was Joseph was said to be brain dead, and he wasn't. He wasn't dead. That was my approach. So then if this is happening to Joseph, and if it's happening to me, a pediatrician, a neonatologist, what's going on? So I investigate and I find out what's going on. And yes, organ transplants are a major part of this whole thing. Every organ that's transplanted comes from somebody who has circulation and respiration. Without circulation and respiration, the organ gets damaged. The heart in about 5 minutes or thereabouts, a little longer for some of the others. But once they're damaged to the point you can't resuscitate them because they're damaged. But what they did is they continued to reduce the amount of time, to reduce the amount of strictness, so that they find better ways to get organs in quicker ways. And yes, it has come to our attention that some people have had organs and really didn't fulfill the criteria. The criteria right along in everybody who's called brain dead in Johns Hopkins University, in 10 patients, in all 10 of them, when they cut on them to take the organs out, the heart rate went up and the blood pressure went up.
They obviously could feel it.
A new study from the Secretary of Health or somebody else. You got to just look at the facts. Look at the life of the person. Know that the person is still alive. If they're not alive, their organs are no good for transplant. So you have to get them alive. But what they have done is what has been done is advantage of people has been taken. For instance, in the declaration of brain death, what they do is they focus on that they're not conscious. But they're not conscious means that they don't respond. It doesn't mean they're not receptive. It means they don't respond. And then they shine a light in the eye, and if there's no response, they say no response. Then that's the 2 of the 3 parts of determination of brain death. And the third part is called the apnea test. And if the 2 of you and all of the listeners don't learn from this, that you need to say no to the apnea test, because what the apnea test is, and incidentally, it's not a test for sleep apnea. That's different. That's okay. The apnea test is where they take away the life-supporting ventilator. You got to envision the patient in the intensive care unit, and the beep is going on the screen, and their color is not unlike yours and mine, and the heart's beating, and there's circulation, and attached is the bag that's getting full of urine. They digest food, and somebody comes along and takes away the ventilator for 10 minutes. If the ventilator is going at 20 cycles a minute, that's 40. And then it goes from there 10. It's 200 breaths. 200 breaths. Can you imagine that? Try and hold your breath for 1 minute. You can't do it unless you're in really good shape. And even then, not very many people can do it. 10 minutes. And what the person who has just had an injury of some kind or another, they have to prove that they can take a breath. They can't prove that they can take a breath and not prove it with some sophisticated testing, but prove it by someone observing whether they can take a breath or not. Observing. and which depends on what? It can be a doctor, or not a doctor. I'm not against other people in medicine. No observation of breath becomes the confirmatory test to say now they're brain dead. We take their organs, and that's what happens. So you get taken advantage of. Learn no to the apnea test at the license bureau. That you're asked, do you want to be an organ donor? And I think the normal, logical way that people would think of that question, well, if I'm dead, of course you can take my organs. That kind of thing. They would be no good to me. But they don't tell you that you have to have circulation and respiration. Your heart has to be beating, or you're no good as a donor. They take advantage of you. They don't give you any information. If you're going to be saying yes or no to something that's as significant about whether you get killed or not, you need to have full and complete information. And you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to know that there are multiple sets of criteria. And the ones that they're pushing on now and what they've done recently with the Academy of Neurology, they take away some more functions of the brain that say they don't count, like the function of the brain that has to do with keeping our body temperature normal. They say that doesn't count. The function that has to do with our brain that stimulates our thyroid, they say just don't test for it anymore. That's all. Just don't test for it. When more than half, in some studies, even more than that, have a functioning thyroid stimulating hormone, which means the brain functions. So what the Academy of Neurology is saying, don't test it. Then we don't know.
So, doctor, there's a technique, and I thought it was called DPN, where they isolate the blood flow to the brain to keep the circulatory system moving for the organs, but yet kill off the brain.
Well, yes. What you see, brain death was invented to get organs. When they invented brain death, and the development of brain death went sequentially from the American Bar Association, and I'll just tell a couple of words, and I'll try not to make it such that it's impossible to know what it is. But the first statute statute that was introduced about brain death was called the American Bar Association. And it said when there was a cessation of total brain function, the single function, the brain has a lot of functions. Mm-hmm. There's no single function. So, and actually that's what one of our things that we wrote about in our early articles. There's no single function. There's multiple functions. And if it's total brain function, if you have absence of any one function, you don't have total brain function. So we pointed out to them that function wasn't adequate. So then they came along with the Uniform Brain Death Act, and the Uniform Brain Death Act used the term functioning of the brain. And functioning is a more proper term if you're going to look at whether there's a response of the brain or not. What we can determine as a doctor, we can determine that it is functioning or not functioning. The function is a different thing. But anyway, before we could even publicly write about that, although we expressed our difficulties with it, they came up with the Uniform Determination of Death Act, a commission, the President's Commission, to make that legal, to make that the law that we should get. They already had the law. They already had the language of the law. Then they have a commission and say, now the commission uses it and follow brain death, functioning. They made it functions, irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain. Sounds really good. And they say, that's what we should have. But then doctors said, we can't have a neurologist. We don't have to have neurologist to declare everybody dead. We shouldn't have to take everyone into a hospital or emergency room to declare them dead because of that. So then they said, okay, we'll put back in something like it used to be, and we'll even reverse the order and put the irreversible cessation of circulation and respiration be number one, and number two is really what we wanted. What occurred over time is they continued to get less strict criteria for brain death, and then it dawned on them, maybe we can get organs from people who have an absence of circulation and an absence of circulation. But what they do is that these patients that have a functioning brain, they can't call them brain dead, but they want their organs. And so they take away their life support and wait until they're without a pulse, not till they're without a heartbeat, but without a pulse for 2 minutes or 5 minutes. Without a pulse, that means not strong enough for the heart to make a pulse, without a pulse for 5 minutes, and then they start the procedure to get the organs. And one of the things they do early on is go in through the neck and cut off the carotid arteries to make sure there's no circulation to the brain, because we don't want them to be aware of what's going on. Yes, this whole thing is evil. The people are not allowed to learn about it. We have what we have going on in as it came to the attention of a hospital, I think in Kentucky, that and a few cases it became to the attention, and yes, it does get into whatever's going on with the Secretary of Health with organ transplants. And what I hear is, well, we're going to have to watch it more closely and have stricter criteria. No, you have to stop killing people. Yes, it is legal killing to cut out the heart. Legal killing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Am I concerned about somebody who has a heart problem? Of course I am. But on the other hand, and if I see somebody who had a heart transplant, I'm happy for them. They're alive, but I know somebody had to be killed to get that. Would that somebody who got the heart say it's all right to kill my fellow man?
I'd feel guilty about it.
Maybe they would. But in any event, I would say that one of the basic principles of a doctor is not to kill, not to harm, and not to mutilate.
Right.
Mutilate is a special word, but it doesn't get used very much anymore. But mutilate means to cut into. We can cut into a body to get a diseased appendix out. But if I'm a medical student and my fellow medical student needs to learn how to do an appendectomy, and I have a normal appendix, I can't lay down on the table and say, cut into me so you learn how to do an appendectomy. You can't do that.
Right.
You can't cut into people unless there is a reason to cut into people. And the reason has to be for disease and what when organs are taken, they're taken from living persons. The living person that's unconscious and on a ventilator doesn't have a lobby. Who has a lobby?
Right.
The person who is older and able to do things to get people to get organs from them for them so they can live longer.
Well, Dr. Byrne,
is such. You have to put the whole thing together, but the basic issue has to do with life and death. Organ transplants are important, and whether you're alive or dead is important, but you got to get at the basics. If you don't get at the basics and what we have going on in a society, we have a thing that we pay attention to things. Right now, we're going through terrible times of people being killed in Rhode Island and in Australia, and then the MIT professor, and all of these things are awful. But do you know what? They killed 2,500 babies in the United States today. They did it.
You didn't hear about that on the media.
If you can kill 2,500, what is this? Another one or two? Make a big issue out of it. But that's not what we should make the issue. And if we can make somebody cut out the heart out of somebody and make somebody else live a longer time, oh, that's pretty good. But that other person had the right to the heart that it belonged to. God gave them their heart, and God didn't give them a heart for somebody else. So anyway, I didn't mean to stop you on your questioning.
Well, you mentioned earlier, you kind of alluded to the fact of the DMV or the License Bureau. Let's talk a little bit about that real quick, because I know a lot of people, when they go renew their license, the person behind the counter says, do you want to be an organ donor? And I would say probably, in the last year, when I've become more aware of this, as I go to renew license in all my vehicles, I pay attention and listen. I would say 8 to 9 out of 10 just agree to it, no questions asked, and they just don't think anything about it. So let's talk a little bit about that, and then let's talk a little bit about the medical card that you have on your website, lifeguardianfoundation.org.
Yes. Well, so far as in medicine, we have a thing called informed consent. If you're going to get an operation, you have to have informed consent, which means that the surgeon tells you all the risks and benefits of that operation. And what they've done at the License Bureau is made it so that consent is that person asking that question, do you wish to be an organ donor? And that is no consent at all, but that's what's done at the License Bureau. And it's wrong. And they, at the License Bureau, they need to be made aware of the things that we have talked about. And then what would happen? I can't tell you. What was the second part of your question?
I just said, we'll talk about the License Bureau or the DMV. And then also on your website, you mentioned information about a medical card there that people can get.
Yeah, we have a medical card, and you can get it from through our website, www.lifeguardianfoundation.org. And what that medical card is that it says, the first thing it says, I wish to get treated. It says that if I'm unable to respond, treat me. I want to get all medical and surgical treatments to protect and preserve my life. That's the first thing, because you see, if you are 30 years old or younger, as I have come across these situations with patients, and they have a serious problem, if they're eligible to have organs that are good for somebody, they will go to one hospital. But if they don't have those organs, they will go to a different hospital. And the level 1 trauma centers are also the organ transplant centers. So the guard says, you want to be treated. It says, do not hasten my death, do not shorten my life, and I am not an organ donor. And then you can sign it and have 2 witnesses. And will it stand up? It will stand up to a certain degree, but I can tell you that the lobby is strong to get organs. Every transplant center has what's called a designated requester. And the treating doctors are not allowed to ask for organs because the treating doctors would be clumsy or not so well acquainted with the words. So they have a designated requester, And that designated requester is described as somebody who's very kind, dressed nicely, befriends the relatives. Would you like a cup of coffee? Do you need to get some rest? And then and that's where the permission come from. But you can designate someone to speak for you, and in some ways that officially can be called a healthcare power of attorney. And everyone needs to have a healthcare power of attorney because they need someone to speak up for them to protect and preserve their life. But we live in a world out of brain death. What came was living wills. There's nothing living about living wills. Living wills are set up to protect doctors and hospitals against liability. Because if you've said that you don't want some treatment, and there's something else they want to give you, and whether you get it or not, you die, there's no way to do anything about it. You've already said you'd rather die. You've already said you don't want to get that treatment. You'd rather die than get that treatment. And so everybody knows that, I say everybody, just about everybody knows that living wills are not a good thing to have. Healthcare power of attorney is a good thing to have, but you need that power of attorney to be there to protect and preserve your life. Don't worry, you won't get too much treatment. Don't worry. Things are all set up that for you to get less treatment, especially, and we live in a time where people, especially over the age of 65, they get less treatment under certain circumstances, and they call it palliative care. And then if you get into the hospital, they have palliative care specialists that come along and say, wouldn't you like to get palliative care? What happens with palliative care? Well, as one person related to me said, when I was taking care of my mother, I would do the blood sugar twice a day. I got her into the system where palliative care came along, and it became 3 times a week. And then it became not necessary. And of course, these things are necessary to adjust the dose of insulin and the like. But what happens is that you have to learn that your life is valuable. It's valuable not only to yourself, but to other people's. And what you have to do is take care of your life, protect and preserve your life. From creation is a special word. The educational system teaches them only about evolution. And a robin never evolved from a sparrow. A penguin never came from a parakeet. It never happened. And there is no such thing as evolution. There can be some modification because of, and we see that in terms of, we look at the woolly caterpillar, and sometimes there's more on it than other times. So there can be still that, but it's still a woolly a caterpillar, the same kind. And so evolution is all that's taught in the schools. It's all it's taught. You got to go back to the basics and go back to creation, and we are created by a creator, and we're created to show the goodness out of the love for each one of us, and the love between husband and wife. There comes a time when it all comes together, and quicker than that, the life begins. And when that life begins, there is a unity of the body and the soul. And that unity of the body and soul is there, a continuum until the event of death. At the event of death, there's separation of the body and soul, and what's left on earth remains, and it gets manifest as a lack of structure, as destruction, and no one ought to be declared dead unless there is destruction of the respiratory and circulatory systems in the entire brain. And that's a model statute that should be, that we should get in every state. We have to get legislators to understand. We have to educate people, and we're doing that with this podcast, and we will do it more. And God willing, people will learn from it and protect and preserve their life and the life of their loved ones.
Well, I know you're retired, but I think if I were living a little bit closer to you, I would bring my 2 granddaughters to see you just under the radar. We wouldn't tell anybody. We would just have you treat them and examine them and tell us how good and how healthy they are and what they need down the road. I love what you stand for, and I trust you way more than I trust a lot of people that are practicing today.
Well, thank you very much. So what I'm saying, though, is not so difficult. It can be easily learned. It can be easily learned and can be done. Protect and preserve the life from creation until the event of death. It's so easy, and so that's all I can tell you. You can all of us can learn about it. The viewers and the listeners can learn about it. Do something yourself. We have to do it. What happens? So two people, 2 of our armed forces get shot in Washington, D.C. So what do they say? We'll send in 300 more National Guards. Come on, folks. Get people to understand that the person is important and alive and special, and do it amongst our own self, in our family, in our neighbors. When we go to meetings, wherever we go, show respect for the life of the person and campaign on respect for the life of the person. And you don't have to do this just from religion. You can do it from the specialness of the person.
Well, Dr. Byrne, if people want to hear more about you, learn more about what you're doing, they just jump over to lifeguardianfoundation.org, lifeguardianfoundation.org. It looks like they have the ability to get some resources and stuff from you there. Is that correct?
That's correct. And if they get in touch with us, we're willing to work with others. I give talks. Not too long ago, I was in Raleigh. I was in Charlotte. I was in 2 places in Florida. Scheduled again in February, maybe in January. And so I go, people do invite me. I'm not looking for places to go. I can be in some ways equally as effective by using this kind of Zoom conference. And so I appreciate what you're doing very much and continue to do what you're doing.
Well, we appreciate you coming on here and sharing your truth. And it was by the referral of Dr. Heidi Klessig, who we had on our show here a few months ago on this whole topic of brain death, that we heard about you. And she highly recommended we reach out to you. She said, Dr. Byrne is a very well-respected, very knowledgeable man, and you should have him on as a guest. So we just want to say thank you for coming on and sharing this. So we hope to have you on in the future for an update and another episode, my friend.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.